I wasn't supposed to wake up again. Not as myself. Not after Chadwick handed me to the wolves with a forged $20 million debt just to protect his mistress. I remember the sound of the gavel sentencing me, the shame my parents wore in court, and the way Chadwick didn't even glance at me. I was his wife in name only, a placeholder for signatures, a scapegoat in tailored dresses. But as the cell door clanged shut, something inside me cracked. I died in that moment, the meek, trusting wife he'd carefully shaped. And when I rose again, it was with clarity sharp enough to cut steel. If this story hits your heart, tap that like button and subscribe, because sometimes survival isn't enough. You need revenge. And my revenge began with silence, patience, and a plan. They thought I was broken, but I wasn't broken. I was just getting started. Prison was quieter than I expected. You hear your thoughts differently when there's nothing but concrete around you. I started tracing every step that led me there. Every document I blindly signed, every night Chadwick said, "Just trust me." I saw it all now. His charm wasn't love. It was manipulation dressed in cologne. Bianca, the mistress, was always nearby, laughing a little too loud, touching his arm a little too often. And me? I was the audience to my own humiliation. But I had time now. Time to study, to read, to connect. I took business law courses from the prison library, talked to former bankers, turned inmates, and learned everything I hadn't known as his wife. The woman he betrayed was gone. What rose in her place was someone who knew exactly what to take and how to take it, slowly, methodically, and without mercy. Chadwick never visited. Not once. Not even to pretend. That hurt at first. Until it didn't. Then it became fuel. I heard from my lawyer, appointed, underpaid, that Chadwick had moved on and was doing well. Of course he was. He had framed me, transferred our assets to shell companies, and played the grieving husband in the press. He claimed I had mental instability, fraud-driven by emotional distress. I remember laughing so hard I cried when I read those statements. Mental instability? If only they knew how stable I had to become just to survive what he did. I began keeping a journal, each page a roadmap of how I'd dismantle everything he built on my name. The debt was fake, the jail time real, but his reckoning would be undeniable, and I wouldn't need to raise my voice. I'd raise his empire up, just to crush it. When my release day finally came, I didn't call anyone. No tearful reunions. No waiting family. I walked out in the same clothes I entered with, cheap fabric, loose seams, but my spine was straight. I found work fast. A small tech startup needed admin help, and I poured myself into it. Not to climb, but to learn. I watched how real businesses ran, how they built systems, managed clients, moved money. I listened more than I spoke. And every night, I worked on my plan. Quiet revenge is a slow simmer. I created new credentials under a variation of my maiden name. Clean credit, a consulting license. Then I started offering services anonymously to rival firms of Chadwick's company. He didn't notice at first. That's the thing about men like him. They never look at the people they bury. Until one day, the dirt shifts. It was a small contract, at first, then a bigger one. I helped one of his competitors land a deal he'd been chasing for months. He lost face at the conference. That was the first time I allowed myself a glass of wine. Since prison. The second time was when Bianca's face popped up on social media, bloated lips, tacky designer bags, standing in front of a wellness retreat in Bali. Apparently, she had become a healing coach. The irony. But Chadwick still hadn't noticed me. That's when I made it personal. I posed as a finance consultant from a boutique firm and arranged a meeting with one of his junior partners. I planted just enough doubt in their minds about his upcoming merger. Then I walked away. Within days, the deal unraveled. He lost 2 investors. And finally, his eyes began to scan the shadows. Bianca reappeared first, dripping in fake remorse, trying to pull me into some half-baked apology brunch. I declined with a note. Heal yourself first. Chadwick, on the other hand, sent legal threats. Anonymous ones, through fake accounts. But I knew his style. The syntax, the phrasing. He couldn't help himself. Narcissists never imagine you can outthink them. But I wasn't playing defense anymore. I had access now. Friends in legal, contacts in compliance, and receipts. Actual receipts. I started leaking anonymous documents to financial watchdogs and journalists. Nothing damning, just enough to spark curiosity. Enough to make his partners look at him sideways. By the time he realized the cracks were forming, I was already building an empire out of his discarded bricks. He once called me his little helper. Now I was the storm on his doorstep. And he didn't even have an umbrella. I didn't want him ruined overnight. No, that would be too merciful. I wanted him to lose slowly, piece by piece, exactly how I had. I tracked every movement in his accounts, flagged every inconsistency, and made sure key clients were always just one meeting away from turning. He blamed interns, fired assistants, even accused Bianca of betrayal. But none of them knew it was me, his ex-wife, the woman he publicly denounced. At night, I slept well, not because I was finished, but because I was in control. And if you're still reading this, tap that subscribe button. There's more to come, and trust me, it only gets better. Because the worst part of Chadwick's downfall wasn't the money he lost. It was realizing the only person who ever truly understood him was the one he tried to destroy. And now, she had nothing left to lose. He looked smaller now. On screen, in person, even in the tone of his emails to colleagues. The confident man who used to stride into meetings like a king now fumbled through press interviews, using buzzwords as a crutch. The media picked up whispers of mismanagement, client manipulation, ethics violations. Nothing stuck officially, but suspicion is poison in the business world. I saw to it that suspicion never cleared. One night, I passed him on the street. He didn't recognize me. I wore a dark coat, no makeup, but I paused just long enough to see the tired eyes beneath his $1,000 haircut. That was enough. Just seeing him as human again. Flawed, cracked, worn. The Chadwick who once declared, "You'll never make it without me," was now barely making it with himself. And I hadn't even really started. So if you're with me still, go on, tap that like button, and don't forget to subscribe. I started seeing a therapist around this time, not for healing, but for sharpening. I didn't want to forget. I wanted to remember every betrayal, every silent scream inside that courtroom, every paper I was forced to sign with trembling hands. My therapist asked if I still loved him. I laughed. Love? That ship sank in front of me. Lit by the fire, he started with Bianca. But there's something more dangerous than love. It's memory. And mine was pristine. I kept it alive, like a living archive, while he tried to erase me. I made sure every file, every receipt, every cruel word lived somewhere he couldn't touch. I began working with regulators anonymously. Tips, leaks, each one small, but intentional. Chadwick didn't need to be exposed all at once. He needed to be haunted. I wanted him looking over his shoulder until the very last brick fell. There was a charity gala, a place where the elite pretended to care and paraded forgiveness as fashion. Chadwick was there, of course, posing with local politicians, arm around a new woman who looked like a discount version of me. I watched from the second floor, behind a pillar, sipping free champagne, and then I made my move. I sent the footage of that night, him whispering, kissing, touching while drunk, to his primary investor's wife. Anonymously, of course. It wasn't about cheating, it was about image. That investor had conservative values, and his wife had sway. The fallout came 3 days later. One canceled contract, one public apology, and one very red-faced Chadwick. I didn't even smile. Revenge had stopped being about joy. Now it was art. And I was painting the collapse stroke by stroke, color by color. Bianca tried to contact me again, this time with panic. "You have to stop, he's going to break." As if I cared. She was scared not for him, but for herself. If Chadwick fell, so did the lifestyle. No more trips, no more cars, no more whispered promises of a company that would never be hers. I ignored her message, then blocked her. The silence was louder than any insult I could offer. Meanwhile, I reached out to a few women Chadwick had wronged before me. Former assistants, one ex he ghosted after draining her savings, even a junior partner he once humiliated into quitting. I didn't ask them for help. I gave them tools, documents, contacts, evidence. Then I watched them light their own fires. One by one, like stars appearing in the night. I wasn't alone anymore. The man who made me feel invisible was now surrounded by people who finally saw him for what he was. I received a letter from my old landlord. Chadwick had tried to dig into my past, hoping to find dirt. But there was nothing. I had paid my dues. Literally, every rent check cleared. Every utility bill paid in full. He was hoping I'd made a mistake, something he could use to discredit me. But my silence had been strategic. While he flaunted, I cleaned. While he celebrated, I prepared. And while he burned bridges, I was building my own. My landlord's letter ended with, "Proud of you, keep going." It was strange, the way that support from unexpected places began to show up once I took my power back. Strangers, neighbors, even old classmates emailed me anonymously to say, "We always wondered why you disappeared." Now they knew, and now they watched because my story was no longer one of survival. It was one of vengeance earned and justice unfolding. The private investigator I hired found something gold: offshore accounts, hidden money funneled through shell companies. It wasn't illegal yet, but it was suspicious, especially because the funds matched payments Chadwick received just before I was left with the false $20 million debt. The puzzle pieces clicked. He'd sold me out to cover his own shady deals. I could have turned this over to the authorities immediately, but I wanted him to stew. So I leaked the data to a financial blogger, someone known for slow burn exposés. They wouldn't name him yet, but the financial world would start whispering. In this world, reputation is currency, and I was bankrupting him in silence. His calls to clients went unanswered. His scheduled keynote speech canceled suddenly. The same man who loved being seen now couldn't even get an invitation. One by one, doors closed. It was my favorite symphony, the sound of isolation. He bumped into me at a cafe. Literally, I didn't recognize him at first. He looked gaunt, older, haunted. "Mara," he said, his voice cracking. I smiled faintly. "Sorry, do I know you?" I turned and walked away before he could reply. My coffee tasted sweeter that day. Later, I got a message from a mutual friend saying Chadwick had checked himself into a wellness retreat. Stress, apparently. Bianca hadn't been seen in days. Some said she left him. Others said she was still there, just not allowed out anymore. I didn't care. My story was no longer about her. She had been a symptom, never the disease. Chadwick was the root rot, and I was finally the gardener with the shears. The retreat wouldn't save him. Not from me, not from the truth, and definitely not from what came next. So if you haven't yet, like and subscribe. This story's far from over. The wellness retreat gave him a few weeks of silence, but the world outside kept turning, and not in his favor. When he returned, his office lease had quietly expired. His assistant had resigned and taken 2 major clients with her. Bianca hadn't left him, but the tension was visible. She'd started posting cryptic quotes on social media, things about betrayal, sacrifice, and not recognizing the man I thought I knew. I didn't even have to lift a finger for that part. They were imploding on their own, choking on the life they thought they deserved. Meanwhile, I filed my final motion to reopen my case. I had a new attorney, brilliant, fierce, and hungry to make her name on my case. We stood outside the courthouse steps and I whispered, "It's time." My evidence was airtight, my resolve steel. I wasn't just walking back into court. I was dragging truth in with me. Court wasn't glamorous. No dramatic music, no slow-motion stares. But it was satisfying. Watching the judge lean forward as the receipts stacked up, hearing Chadwick's lawyer fumble for explanations. It was a slow unraveling. My favorite part, when I submitted the offshore account records. The courtroom went still. Chadwick's jaw tightened, and I saw the flicker of panic beneath his polished exterior. The man who once boasted about controlling narratives was now sweating through his designer suit. My lawyer ended with, "Your Honor, we're not just requesting a dismissal of the debt. We're requesting restitution." That word echoed. Restitution. Not revenge. Not pity. Payment. And I deserved every cent. When the judge called a recess, Chadwick rushed out like a hunted animal. I didn't follow. I just sat there, back straight, eyes forward. For the first time, I felt it fully. Justice wasn't a dream. It was real, and it was coming. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing like it was a red carpet. I didn't hide. I spoke clearly, calmly. For years, I was silent. Today, I speak not just for me, but for anyone who's ever been silenced by someone in power. My voice was steady, but my hands trembled, not with fear, with release. The story I once buried was now the headline. Chadwick tried to silence me with debt, shame, and isolation. Now his name was trending, for all the wrong reasons. People who once doubted me sent apologies. Even the partner who once mocked me for being too emotional emailed to say, "You were right." I didn't reply. Some apologies are just performances. What mattered now was this. I had become undeniable. If you've made it this far, remember, every like, every subscription helps stories like this rise above the noise. So don't scroll past, click, and stand with me. Bianca finally left him. Quietly. No drama. She packed her things one night and vanished. I knew because she called me. Not to apologize, but to thank me. I thought he loved me. She said, he just needed someone else to destroy. There was a long pause. I hope you ruin him. I didn't reply. I didn't need her validation. But her words felt like strange closure. She had never been my true enemy, just a pawn with blood on her hands. Now she was out of the game. Chadwick, though, he had nowhere to go. His assets were frozen pending investigation. His name was being removed from boards. The man who once laughed at my tears was now begging for grace on closed doors. And I finally smiled, not because he lost, but because I'd finally won on my terms without losing my soul in the fire. People started asking me to speak. Podcasts, panels, women's groups. They wanted to hear how I did it, how I went from broken to rebuilt. I told the truth. There was no magic, just patience, planning, and remembering who I was before he convinced me I was small. I shared my story, not to shame him, but to illuminate a pattern. How powerful men use love as a mask for control. How debt can be weaponized. How silence is often survival, not weakness. And every time I spoke, I saw eyes light up, heads nod, tears fall. I realized then my story was never just mine. It was a mirror for others to see themselves. That's why I tell it now. That's why you're here, still listening. So hit that like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs it. Because survival is powerful, but turning pain into purpose, that's liberation. I didn't check Chadwick's social media, but people kept sending me screenshots. His followers plummeted. His polished posts stopped. One day, someone shared a live stream. Him, disheveled, stammering through a half-hearted apology. I made mistakes, he mumbled, eyes darting everywhere but the camera. I was misled. Misled? That was the excuse. Even now, when the truth was bleeding from court documents and affidavits, I didn't comment. The world was already dragging him across digital coals. But I admit, I watched the entire thing. Not for closure, not for vengeance. Just to remember, this man once had power over my life. And now, he couldn't even hold a camera steady. People ask if I felt pity. I didn't, because apologies that come only when consequences knock aren't apologies. They're panic, and I no longer accepted panic as currency for redemption. I closed the video and went back to work with peace, not pity, with my name cleared and restitution secured. I took a trip I had once canceled for him, Florence. I stood on the Ponte Vecchio at sunset, breathing air that didn't carry his name. I bought gelato without glancing over my shoulder. Freedom felt like quiet mornings, shoes without blisters, and sleep without clenched fists. One evening, I met a couple on a vineyard tour. They were kind, curious. You seem like someone who's come a long way, the woman said. I smiled. You have no idea. I didn't tell them my past. I didn't need to. My story was no longer my introduction. It was part of my foundation. Yes, but I built floors above it now. And that's the real rebirth. Not forgetting the pain, but refusing to be owned by it. If this story stirs something in you, don't just feel it. Share it. Someone out there needs to know freedom waits, too. I moved cities. A fresh apartment, quiet street. A coffee shop that knew my name by the third visit. I built a new version of success, one that didn't rely on anyone's shadow. My consultancy took off. Clients respected my boundaries. No one asked me to smile more. I even started writing, anonymously at first. But eventually, I put my name on it. Because why not? I'd earned that. A local paper featured me in their Women Who Rose series. I stood for the photo shoot in a power suit. I bought myself no discount, no permission. That photo hangs in my hallway now. Not for vanity, for reminder. That woman, she rose from a $20 million lie, betrayal, jail, and silence. And now she owns her name. So if you're still here, rooting for her, rooting for you, like, subscribe, and remember, pain is real, but so is resurrection. And mine was just beginning. Chadwick tried to email me. Of course he did. The subject line was blank. The body? Rambling, pitiful. I've lost everything. They've turned on me. I never thought it would end like this. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked for recognition. For me to look back. I didn't. I archived it. Just in case my lawyer ever needed it. But I didn't reply. That door was welded shut. He lost everything because he gambled with someone who refused to fold. Let that be his legacy. Not mine. I was done writing chapters where he appeared. My life had turned a new page. And his name wasn't in the table of contents anymore. And if this whole journey taught me anything, it's this. Healing doesn't always look like softness. Sometimes it looks like silence, boundaries, and letting people drown in the tides they thought they controlled. People still whisper about me. Some say I got lucky. Others say I must have had help. But most now say what they never used to. She's strong. She's sharp. Don't mess with her. And it's funny, isn't it? The world fears women who refuse to be broken more than they ever feared the men who broke them. I walk taller now, not because I have to prove anything, but because I don't. I'm not a survivor. I'm a strategist, a builder, a woman who was framed, jailed, erased, and who came back with her own pen. If that's the kind of story you believe more people should hear, you know what to do. Click like, hit subscribe, and pass this story forward. Because the world doesn't need more perfect women. It needs more real ones. And if my voice can clear a path for just one more woman to rise, then this was worth everything. As time passed, Chadwick's name became a cautionary tale, His fall whispered in corporate circles. His once loyal associates now avoided his calls. No one wanted to be associated with failure, especially the kind of failure that was public, humiliating, and deserved. He tried everything to salvage his reputation: donations to charities, vague public apologies, and even a poorly executed book about second chances. But the world had already moved on, and I, for one, was already planning the next chapter. A friend of mine once said, "People don't remember your pain. They remember how you rise from it." Well, I had risen, and I was no longer the woman they whispered about. I was the woman they respected. If you're still with me on this journey, consider hitting that like button. There's power in knowing you're not alone, and together we can help each other rise higher. A year after the trial, I received an unexpected letter. It was from the financial advisor, who had once been so deeply involved with Chadwick's accounts. He confessed that, in the midst of everything, he'd suspected foul play, but hadn't dared speak up. His conscience had finally caught up with him. He apologized for staying silent and admitted he'd been complicit. The letter felt empty. There were no more apologies I needed, no more redemption to be found in his words. I burned the letter in the fireplace. Closure wasn't for him. It was for me. I no longer needed validation from the people who failed me. I was too far gone from the person they once tried to break. If this resonates with you, don't just keep scrolling. Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who's ready to burn their own letter. Business was booming, but I didn't feel a rush. Not anymore. I'd learned that the best victories weren't won in flashy meetings or under bright lights. They were won in quiet, everyday choices, like choosing joy over guilt, peace over chaos, or clarity over confusion. I found my joy in simple things: reading on a rainy afternoon, helping others build their brands without strings attached, teaching self-worth in seminars, and watching my old self melt away in the rear view. One evening, I sat by the window, watching the sun set on my new life. It wasn't the life I'd planned, but it was the one I deserved. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've reclaimed everything that was once stolen. If you're ready to reclaim yours, like, share, and subscribe. Let's take this journey together. Chadwick's last-ditch attempt to salvage his empire came when he tried to buy out my consultancy. He'd heard I was getting a new office, one that was rapidly gaining clients and respect. His offer was absurdly low, meant to insult, not offer a deal. He thought I was just like the woman who begged for crumbs before. But I wasn't her anymore. The same man who once controlled me with money now thought he could control me with an offer. I laughed. I made my counteroffer, an amount that would leave him bankrupt. But I didn't want his money. I wanted something far more valuable: his defeat. I wanted him to know that not everything is for sale. Not my integrity, not my power, and certainly not my peace. Sometimes the best revenge is making someone realize they can't touch you. If this story speaks to you, hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe. When I saw him again, it wasn't in a courtroom or boardroom. It was in the grocery store. Of all places, he was standing in front of the avocado stand, glancing nervously at his phone. His once immaculate suit was now wrinkled. The edges of his reputation faded. I walked past him, and for a moment, I saw the panic in his eyes. Then, as if trying to salvage his pride, he called out, "I didn't mean for it to go this way." He said, "I didn't stop. I didn't even look back." "No," I replied quietly. "You meant for it to go exactly this way. The only difference is you didn't think I'd survive it." I walked on, and I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. The old version of me would have crumbled in his presence. But not now. Not anymore. If you're feeling empowered, drop a like. And subscribe for more moments of liberation. I moved on from him. And so did the people who once saw us as a power couple. They saw me for what I truly was: a woman who could stand on her own, without needing anyone to complete her. My story wasn't one of rescuing. It was a story of rescue. I'd saved myself. The betrayal had been his, the transformation, mine. There were days I felt melancholy over the wasted years, but mostly I felt gratitude for everything I'd learned, for the strength I found hidden beneath layers of doubt and fear, and for the future I was finally living, one of my choosing. If you want to take control of your future, don't just admire the courage. Take it, like, share, and subscribe. This journey is yours, too. Chadwick begged to speak to me before the final verdict. As if a few pathetic words could erase years of betrayal, he shuffled toward me, eyes hollow, his confidence shattered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. He whispered, we were supposed to win together. I looked him dead in the eyes. No hate, no love, just clarity. You framed me. You gave her everything. And when I needed you most, you turned me into your scapegoat. I turned away before his lips could tremble into more lies. If you've ever been gaslit, silenced, or betrayed, and still stood tall, please like this video. Your strength matters. The court declared him guilty of fraud and sentenced him to pay the debt he once forced onto me. Watching his mistress burst into tears when her assets were frozen felt like the poetic closure I never thought I'd get. She clung to him, screaming his name as he was escorted out. But he didn't look back, not at her, not at anyone. His kingdom of lies had crumbled. The moment was solemn, yet triumphant. I'd spent too long wishing for this day. Now that it was here, it felt quieter than I expected, but deeply satisfying. I walked outside and felt the sun for the first time in what felt like years. Freedom didn't scream. It whispered through the air, kissed my skin, and settled in my chest. It didn't matter that I had no grand applause waiting outside. My victory didn't need an audience. If you believe in reclaiming your life after betrayal, don't forget to subscribe. I'm not done telling stories like this. And maybe one day, you'll find your own in them too. 3 months later, I opened my first community center for women wrongfully accused and silenced, because healing is powerful, but helping others heal is transformative. The news covered it. People who once avoided me were now applauding. I didn't need their validation, but I took the moment to let my past self feel proud. She survived. She endured. And now she was guiding others home. Even if just one woman walks into those doors and finds her voice again, it'll be enough. Chadwick's mother sent me a letter, apologizing, ashamed. She didn't know he'd gone so far. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Sometimes the most powerful answer is silence. Not because you're weak, but because you finally moved on. She had her part to play in defending him. Now she'd sit in the ruins. I wasn't going to carry guilt that didn't belong to me. That version of me, the one who bowed, who begged, who broke, she was gone. And good riddance. On my way home, I passed the little cafe where I used to cry into my coffee, too afraid to go back to an empty house. Now, I walked in, ordered my drink, and sat by the window, peaceful, composed, complete. The owner smiled. You look different, she said. I smiled back. I am. If this moment made you feel something, even just a flicker, tap-like, sometimes it's not about revenge. It's about reclaiming your peace. At night, I'd light a candle by the window, not for him, but for the woman I used to be. I thanked her for holding on, for not letting go when it would have been easier. Every scar was now a constellation in my sky. Every tear had watered the garden I stood in now. Some pain doesn't get buried. It gets planted, and from it, something stronger grows. I received an invitation to a reunion gala where Chadwick and I first met. I went, not for nostalgia, but to show up in the dress I once thought I wasn't worthy to wear. People whispered. He wasn't there. Of course. His name was now attached to shame, not prestige. But I danced. I smiled. And I left before midnight, no longer needing a fairy tale ending. I came home to a clean apartment, a warm meal I cooked for myself, and my favorite book waiting on the table. There was no applause, no spotlight, but there was peace. And that, more than anything, is the reward for surviving hell and refusing to stay there. If you've watched this far, thank you. Like and subscribe if you believe in second chances. And more importantly, in giving them to yourself. I closed my eyes that night with no lingering anger, no what-ifs, just stillness. Chadwick, he'd spend years rebuilding a life he tore down. Me? I'd already built something better. Reborn didn't mean revenge alone. It meant returning to myself. And I liked who I saw in the mirror now. She was finally free.